Con movies are all about confidence, man. There are these clever heroes who act like they have the solution to everyone's problems. Problems they didn't even know they had. They tend to come across an innocent damsel, too smart for their wiles. It forces them to confront their facade they put on for the world and themselves. Rian Johnson's The Brothers Bloom takes this idea one step further by utilizing the con man's weapon of choice, story, as a centerpiece to confront why we tell stories to others and to ourselves. Brothers Bloom is about two brothers played by Adrian Brody and Mark Ruffalo, who try to con a rich shut-in heiress played by Rachel Weisz. It's a witty and romantic adventure that has themes of self-deception and courage. Written and directed by Rian Johnson, this film is a lot more carefree than his previous film, Brick, but a lot of the fun zaniness that's featured in his latest outing, Knives Out. The Brothers Bloom also stars Rinko Kikuchi and Robbie Coltrane, and even has Ricky Jay as a narrator, so you know you're in good hands. It's almost 2 hours long, but it goes by quick. It's fun as a con man film, and it's deep as a romantic comedy, so go ahead and give it a watch. We learn all we need to know about the titular Brothers Bloom through the formation of their first con as children. Young little Bloom wanted to have the courage to just talk to a girl he likes. Steven, wanting to help his brother, and make a couple dollars on the side, comes up with a con that begins with Bloom having something to talk to the girl about. It leads to a chase for a will-o-wisp that supposedly leads to a treasure. Bloom gets so excited by the sight of it, he forgets he's part of a con and chases it. This is why Bloom is the ultimate mark. He runs ahead of the other kids and is able to see the truth, his brother holding a flashlight. Through this, he learns how easy it is to blind oneself with fables and stories. He grows up conning with his brother, seeing mark after mark fall for their stories, like he once did as a young boy. He never pursues his own life outside of these cons with his brother, denying himself an identity of his own. His lack of a first name could also be a hint of this loss of identity, since everyone calls him Bloom, which, as shown in their adoption papers, is their last name. He gets fed up with this in his 30s and tells Steven he's tired of living his life through his brother's stories. He's so dependent on his brother at this point that he can't even finish his thought without his help. He tells him he wants a life unwritten. But for Bloom, that just means spending months on end in his hammock just chilling. That's because Bloom's never had to find his own motivation in life, thanks to his brother. So Steven finds him and offers him one last con, and then he's out of his life forever. Their mark? Penelope. She's a rich shut-in that spends her life learning skills, gaining hobbies, and reading books of adventure and romance. The idea is to give her that sense of adventure with an antique delivery to Greece that turns into a smuggler's quest concluding in Mexico, strung along by a romance with Bloom. But Penelope is a little too smart to be a mark. She never finds excitement in all their planned twists and turns they have in store for her. She even calls out Steven for his lazier details. It's the genuine, unplanned moments that she finds the most excitement in, as well as a general sense of adventure and the blooming romance. And it's with their conversation that we get into the art of storytelling and cons. She grows up believing that she was allergic to everything, but later she found out it was only the metal and the needles. It wasn't a con, it was a false belief, but she felt conned. She almost left her mansion entirely, but her mother got sick, so she stayed. She secretly hated her mother for keeping her stuck at home, but she knew it wasn't her fault. So to con herself into staying to help her, she made herself believe that she could see the beauty of it and love her mother because of it. Now, did she do this as escapism from the situation, or was it in con to ensure there was no escape? It didn't matter for her, for in either case, it helped her stay. And she understands both sides of being a con and a con artist, but Bloom believes that telling stories to get something is a trap. She doesn't follow this and tells him to make his own story and to own it, to fall into the belief and quit questioning everything. The more validity is questioned, the more you're on your way of your own personal enjoyment. But the deeper she gets into the con, the more she realizes how freaky and scary life is with all its consequence and danger. The more you know, the less you can con yourself, the more real life becomes. Penelope calls out Bloom on one of his biggest flaws, his inability to do anything that requires a real consequence, that he's grown so comfortable playing parts in intricate schemes that the idea of real, uncertain life is too freaky scary for him. This relates to an idea of an unwritten life being one that requires no action, no agency, and no living at all, which is why he steals the apple. He makes a choice on his own without any big scheme attached. He has real agency for maybe the first time in years. But then comes consequence, which leads to another chase, and it's always the chase that makes Bloom lose his situational awareness. In his enjoyment of spontaneity and randomness, he trips and falls, an easily avoidable obstacle which sends him to jail, forcing Steven to bail him out. This is because Steven has what Bloom rejects, and that's cunning and planning. For Bloom, that always leads to needless manipulation. Bloom loses himself to the fun of spontaneity and feels real joy with Penelope, but when Steven reminds him that Mexico, their conclusion, isn't that far away, this changes. It's very clear in his face he doesn't want to let her go, but this reminds him of the situation, also reminds him of the man he currently is. In this final act of the con, Steven lays into Bloom about his hesitation with Penelope. He claims that Bloom's scared of actually falling in love with her, since he doesn't know the difference between acting like you love someone and actually loving someone, or that worse option, that there is no difference, and love is just another con. When you spend your life conning, can you even tell what's real in your heart? Bloom lets Steven say all this as an effort to scare Penelope away. She's too smart to be a mark. What gets her to leave is Bloom's attempt to get her to leave, instead of wanting her to stay. Now Penelope is in the spot of a young Bloom, carried away by a story of adventure and fantasy, only to have the rug pulled from under her. But unlike him, she doesn't reject fantasy and agency altogether. She rejects her comfort prison and sets out to free Bloom from his. But Bloom isn't ready. When he had to face Mexico, he lost all the agency he gained from apple lifting. So he asked Steven to create a con that would make Penelope believe they're both dead, so she'll be free of him. But their plan backfires. Steven is taken by the former mentor, the Diamond Dog, and a ransom note is later delivered. It just so happens to ask for the exact amount for the remaining fortune Penelope has left. Bloom takes this as proof that Steven could be conning him, but that's his only evidence. Conflicted, he brings a gun. Just one gun. If he was trying to save Steven, he would have brought 2 guns for both of them. But the one gun implies that he was planning on pointing it at his brother to make him leave his life once and for all, potentially one way or another. He finds Steven tied up and surrounded. Steven apologizes for getting him into all this and begs him to just leave. But Bloom has to know the truth, which confuses Steven because he would never con his brother. This is where Bloom learns that Diamond Dog knew of its conflict reality and even depended on it. He knew Bloom wouldn't appreciate the gravity of the situation and would easily question Steven's motives. But Steven wants Bloom safe. That's why he begs him to just leave with his life. Even if you go through life dealing in lines and cons, you're just as easy as mark as anyone else. So Bloom draws his only gun on the surrounding gunmen. But Bloom gets conned yet again. The gunman's pistol clicks empty, so Bloom goes charging. Only Steven knew the gunman had a second pistol, so he has to jump and tackle Bloom and get shot in the process. After the last gunman leaves, Steven cons Bloom since he knows this is the day he dies. He acts like he's not really dying and that the whole thing was a con. Steven tells Bloom to lie to Penelope about his death so they can go enjoy their life together. This gets Bloom to leave and say goodbye to his brother. Maxwell has informed Penelope of the actual truth, so that she can be there for Bloom's eventual realization miles away from potential harm. Bloom had a clear rejection of scheming and planning, seeing it all as cons and lies. To Bloom, to live a life unwritten is to live without schemes and plans. To Steven, there is no such thing as a life unwritten, just a badly written one. When Steven is in trouble, Bloom fails to plan properly since he's more actor than writer, and it costs Bloom his brother's life. It may have come this far because Bloom always had a question of what was real or con. He rejected the outside world due to a lack of trust. This is how he justified living his life through distorting reality. Penelope, on the other hand, embraced the distortions to her advantage, which also gave her the sight to see others' lies. When it was time for Bloom to confront reality and identify the liars, he fails. Even the Diamond Dog knew to use this to his advantage against Bloom. But this all stems from Steven's distortions of reality. He spends a movie warping reality to his need while always aware of the truth. He even helped out his brother using distortions, but rarely did anything genuine with them. He can't even believe that his brother could distinguish real love from fake love at this point. But when he needs to depend on Bloom, what he turns out to be unable to distinguish is real trouble from fake trouble. That's why in his final moments, he's forced to distort reality one last time and send his brother away, instead of spending his last moments on Earth with the person he cares for the most. He dies alone, while his brother is miles away with the woman he believes he loves. The moral of the story? The distortions of reality can be beneficial, but it can lead to a mistrust from those closest to you. The more you distort, the more you and those closest to you become unaware of reality, the more vulnerable you all become to manipulation by others. Eventually, you may end up alone with no one to truly trust other than yourself. But if your reality is distorted beyond your recognition, can you really trust yourself? Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this, be sure to like and subscribe. If you want to support this channel, visit our Patreon, and be sure to check out our Tiny Van Media website. Stay safe and stay on the real.